Night was dripping down the pavement like someone slowly smashing bottle after bottle. Lawrence Street lay dead, wet tram tracks, an overstuffed storm grate, a lamplight slicing through the dark like a blade. The sky hung low, stuck together with smoke and water. Frank Malloy stood alone. Former cop, former husband, former man. Now, a watchman at the back door of Sullivan's bar, more silent than alive. Fingers holding a cigarette like it might still give him meaning. Under his cap, a gray neck, always tense. Eyes buried in shadow. He drank every day, but no one knew why. He listened to jazz through the walls, as if trying to remember what a heart sounded like. Sometimes whispers stirred in the alley. Maybe the rain, maybe his past. That night at 3:15, the door slammed harder than usual. The cigarette went out on its own. Frank looked up. She was standing on the wet threshold. A coat of cheap wool, lips like a trap, eyes without words. In her hand, a letter. He knew those eyes. They'd belonged to his brother, the moment bullets took him down in 21. And to the woman who vanished at dawn, leaving only the scent of cheap soap and a photo on the dresser. She didn't say a word, just placed the letter in his hand and walked back into the rain. The stains on her collar weren't wine. He stood there a minute, then tore the envelope open. The paper smelled of damp wood and broken faith. It was written in the voice of a dead man, or nearly dead. Just an address, Old Port, Warehouse 9B, and a line. You were the last to see him, and you remember. Frank didn't remember, or pretended not to. But the rain was the kind you couldn't ignore. The cab coughed twice before starting, and by the time Frank reached the Old Port, the rain had turned the streets to black glass. Warehouse 9B leaned like a drunk against the bay. Its rusted tin roof slumped under the weight of time. Fog moved low, licking at the wooden pylons like some patient animal. Frank paid the driver with a crumpled bill and lit a fresh cigarette with shaking hands. The flame flared against his face, outlining lines carved by years he never talked about. He didn't want to go in, but he had nowhere else to be. Inside, the air was cold with salt and oil. Broken crates littered the floor like bones. One of the old crane hooks swung slightly from the ceiling, creaking in rhythm with the sea. He moved slow, footsteps muffled on the rotting planks. There, behind a tarp draped over a forgotten shipment, he found the first sign. A glove. Brown leather, cut open at the palm. Blood dried at the wrist. Frank crouched, touched it lightly, then froze. Perfume. Faint, old, and unmistakable. Violet and tobacco. Her scent. Evelyn's. Gone 11 years. Dead, they'd said. Drowned herself off Pier 14 after testifying against the Garvano family. But Frank had never seen a body. Just a scarf tangled on the rocks and a lot of silence from City Hall. Now her perfume. Now this glove. He heard it before he saw it. A soft, hollow shift in the shadows behind him. He turned, but the warehouse was empty. Still, something had moved. Or someone. He took out his flask, swallowed 2 slow burns, and stared at the glove like it might blink. You remember now, a voice said, soft as cloth tearing. Frank didn't turn. Depends who's asking. She stepped from the shadows like a secret long buried. Rain in her hair, cigarette burning at the corner of her mouth. Evelyn, older, thinner, eyes sharper. The dead didn't age. She had. I thought you were dead, she said. You weren't the only one. Frank dropped the glove. It hit the floor like a gavel. Where the hell have you been? Her smile was tight. Same place you've been. Nowhere. Difference is, I left on purpose. He wanted to touch her, to shake her, to make her explain the years, the silence, the way she vanished and left him with ghosts. Instead, he said, the letter. That was you. No. But I knew it would reach you. Frank looked past her at the warehouse walls, bullet holes in the wood. Old, but not forgotten. What is this? He asked. Why now? Evelyn took a long drag, then flicked the ash onto the floor. Because you're still the only man who never lied to me, and I need someone who doesn't flinch. Frank stepped closer. She didn't move. He saw the scar now, cutting up from her collarbone toward the ear. a pale thread stitched into memory. Who hurt you? Same people who run this city. Only now they're cleaning house, killing off anyone who ever knew what they buried in 1913. Frank felt the weight settle again on his shoulders, heavier than the rain. You think I'm still that man? I think you're the only one left. The wind outside shifted. A horn sounded from the docks. 3 short, 1 long. A signal, a warning, a countdown. Evelyn dropped her cigarette and crushed it under her heel. They'll come here, tonight. They'll want the box. What box? She reached behind the tarp and pulled out a small dented metal case. Old army issue, the kind used for dispatches. Rust had eaten the edges, but the lock was clean. New. They think it's got the ledgers, names, payments, routes, things they buried with the old administration. Does it? No, she said, but they don't know that. Frank took the box, turned it over. It was cold, heavy. He didn't like the way it felt in his hands, like it belonged to the dead, not the living. You should burn it, he said. I tried, she said, her voice low, but some things don't burn. He looked at her again, this woman who had once whispered promises into his neck at midnight. She was thinner now, voice rougher, but she still watched him like she expected too much. You still trust me? He asked. No, she said, but I remember what we were. That has to be enough. He nodded. Then we move. Where? Someplace the city forgot, and fast. They stepped out into the rain together. No hand-holding, no apologies, just motion. 2 broken things carrying something worse than weight. By the time they reached the back alley, Frank spotted movement near the waterfront. 2 men, wide-shouldered, walking like wolves. One held something long under his coat. Not a cane. Too late, Evelyn said. Frank handed her the box. Left or right? She pointed left. There's a cellar through the laundry dock. You go, Frank said. I'll buy a minute. She hesitated. He gave her the look he used to give suspects. Cold, final, certain. She vanished. He stepped out, the rain drenching him like guilt. Hands empty, eyes steady. The 2 men saw him, hesitated. One said, Stratford. Not him, the other muttered. He's older. Too much gut. Frank smiled. Still got sharp eyes. The first man pulled the gun. Frank moved faster. The blow was sloppy, the impact loud. Gun hit the pavement, but pain flared in Frank's ribs like old debts. He went down hard, boots, a knee, a fist. And then sirens. Far off, but coming. Someone tipped the cops. Or maybe Evelyn had planned for more than one escape. The men scattered like roaches. Frank lay in the gutter, bleeding into the city. A shadow leaned over him. Evelyn, face tight, voice thin. You idiot, she said. He coughed, blood on his lips. I stayed, he muttered. She touched his forehead, just once, like a prayer. Then she vanished again. Frank lay there, watching the light of the street lamp blur with rain and blood and memory. The box was gone, the secret still locked. But something had cracked open in the night. Not a case, not a door, but Frank Malloy himself, and nothing was going to close it again. Frank's ribs ached like old brass hinges, each breath reminding him he was still alive. He'd limped 12 blocks by dawn, favoring the left leg, coat soaked through. Blood crusted at the collar of his shirt, and his hat, lost somewhere in the alley, was already someone else's memory. He reached the back of St. Elmo's Laundry, an old brick husk near the freight tracks. Once a front for the Caruso Syndicate, now shuttered but not empty. The windows were blacked out and the door was barred with a rusted chain. Frank rapped twice, slow, then 3 quick. It took a moment. Then came the click of metal and the hiss of wood on concrete. Evelyn opened the door, hair pinned back, grease smudged on her cheek. She was already moving again, hands sweeping him in. Upstairs is compromised, she said, but the cellar's dry. Frank dropped onto a crate. His lungs barked. They hit harder than the old days. Evelyn tossed him a rag. You're not 25 anymore. Neither are you. She smirked. Still faster than you. The cellar was cold, bricked, smelled of old soap and mildew. One flickering bulb hung from a twisted wire. On a table, maps, old photographs, and a pistol. Frank's eyes lingered on one photo. A group of men in fedoras, laughing on the steps of City Hall. One face was circled in red. Alderman Hugo Verne. He's still alive? Frank asked. Alive, and running the city like it's his butcher shop, Evelyn said, pouring 2 fingers of rye into a cracked glass. You used to call him the quiet knife. Because you never saw the cut, only the blood after. She handed him the glass. He drank, grimaced. This what the box ties back to? Evelyn nodded. Ledger's gone, but it's not about money anymore. It's about memory, about what they did in 1913 under the church, in that tunnel that doesn't appear on any map. Frank stared at her. The fire? Evelyn lit a cigarette. Her fingers trembled slightly. There were bodies in the walls, not from the blaze, from before. He leaned back. Christ. They used the fire to seal it, blamed a gas line. The papers printed it in 3 lines on page 5. You saw this? She nodded once. My father was a laborer on the sewer line. He found something, told my mother, then he vanished. Frank set the glass down, and Verne paid to keep it quiet. He paid a lot of people, she said. Cops, reporters, priests, but not all of them stayed bought. Frank rubbed his temples. The whiskey didn't help. Why now? Because something's shifted. Verne's dying. Power's about to change hands, and the new sharks want to clean the tank. Anyone who remembers gets erased. Frank looked at the gun on the table. A Colt, .32, loaded, clean. I said I wasn't that man anymore, he said. I didn't believe you then. He stared at the photos again. One of them was from a funeral, black umbrellas, men not crying. I knew one of these cops, he said. Louis DeMarco said he was investigating the blaze. Then he transferred to Harbor. Then he drowned. 3 weeks after he talked to my father, Evelyn added. Silence hung between them like a wet coat. She took a slow drag, then said, There's one other name. A boy who survived. He saw it, was in the church basement, never spoke again. Why, what happened to him? They called it catatonia, sent him to Ashcroft Asylum. Frank's mouth went dry. That place still exists? Sort of. They renamed it. Private now. Experimental medicine. Meaning? Meaning it's where secrets go to die slow. Frank stood slowly. His ribs screamed. You think the boy remembers? I think if he doesn't, no one does. He walked to the door, hand on the knob. You're going now? Evelyn asked. He didn't look back. While there's still someone left to ask. She touched his arm. Light. Quick. But it stopped him. Don't get yourself killed, she said. He said nothing. Just walked into the dawn, coat flaring behind him like a tired ghost. Ashcroft sat on the hill above Westbridge, hidden behind black trees and iron fences. It looked like a school for children no one wanted to remember. The gate buzzed when Frank pressed the intercom. Yes? A voice, male, dry, clipped. I'm here to see a patient, Vincent Howley. Pause. Relation? Investigator, Frank said. State. Another pause. ID? Frank held up a folded card to the lens. His old badge. Expired, but real enough. The gate buzzed again. Opened. The nurse who met him was pale, polite, and empty-eyed. She led him down a corridor that smelled of bleach and sleep. They passed rooms with small windows. Some had people inside, others didn't. Mr. Howley doesn't speak, the nurse said. He hasn't spoken since he was 7. How old is he now? 32. The room was small. A bed, a chair, a window barred like an afterthought. In the corner, a man sat curled, thin as bone, rocking gently. His eyes were open, but far. Frank stepped in. The nurse stayed at the door. Vincent? Frank said softly. No reaction. He knelt slowly. You were in the church, the fire, the tunnel. Vincent twitched. Frank leaned closer. Do you remember the man with the blue gloves? The rocking stopped. Then Vincent blinked once and raised his hand. Slowly, painfully, he drew a shape in the air, a circle, then 3 slashes inside. Frank felt his breath go still. It was the symbol from the box. Vincent's hand dropped. He began to hum, low, broken, like a music box losing teeth. Frank stood. Outside, the nurse asked, "Get what you needed?" Frank didn't answer. He left Ashcroft with the sound of that hum burrowed in his chest. Something had survived. Something Vern hadn't buried deep enough. By nightfall, the city had turned black and slick again, its brick lungs steaming under the rain. Frank stood outside Evelyn's hideout, with mud on his boots and that symbol still burned behind his eyelids. Circle. 3 slashes, like a door, like a wound. He knocked twice, waited. The door opened an inch. Her eyes met his before her voice did. "You saw him?" Frank nodded. He drew the mark, without being asked. Evelyn exhaled, stepped aside. Inside, the cellar was colder. The maps were rolled. The pistol was gone from the table. "I packed," she said, "in case you didn't come back." Frank dropped his wet coat on a nail. "You were right. It's all still there. Even if no one wants to see it." She handed him a towel. "We have to move. There's a man, Dockery. He works sewer lines under Vern's watch. Lives up near the reservoir now. Real paranoid. But he talked once, in 19. Said the ground there was hollow. Said it echoed." Frank rubbed his face. "You trust him?" "No, but I believe him." They took the side streets. No cab, no noise. Evelyn walked fast, heels quiet against the cobblestones. Frank followed, breath tight, ribs still screaming with every step. The Dockery house was a slumped shack, half swallowed by vines. A rusted mailbox leaned into the fence like it had lost hope. Evelyn knocked once, sharp. A voice answered, "Wrong house." She replied, "We brought the silence." The door opened. Dockery looked like someone who'd forgotten what day it was. Long hair, yellow eyes, hands that twitched even when still. He held no weapon, but the air around him bristled. "Who's he?" Dockery muttered. "Friend," Evelyn said. "Old uniform." Dockery sniffed. "He smells like regret." Frank said, "That's accurate." Inside, the house was filled with paper, maps, clippings, blueprints faded into sepia. Dockery pointed to the table with a trembling finger. "You're chasing the vault," he whispered. Frank leaned in. "Vault?" That's what they called it, back then. When the earth cracked and they didn't want to fill it. It's not just a tunnel, it's a room, with walls, with metal rings in the stone, for binding. Evelyn paled. "Binding what?" Dockery looked at them both, then laughed. "Not what? Who?" He pulled a yellowed folder from a drawer, slapped it on the table. This was sealed, City Archive. Took me 4 years to get it out. Inside, in a single sheet, a confession, dated 1913. Signed by Father Riley, St. Miriam's Parish. Frank read it aloud. "They brought him to the crypt, screaming, not words, something else. They said he'd seen too much. They chained him to the far wall, and then they sealed the stair." The paper shook in his hands. Evelyn whispered, "A child?" Dockery said nothing. Then, a sound. Outside. Heavy, deliberate. Boots on gravel. Frank reached for the curtain. A black car idled at the corner. No lights. Just presence. Evelyn's voice was tight. "They found us." Frank looked to Dockery. "Back way?" Dockery shook his head. "No such thing." Frank pulled Evelyn toward the stairs. "Then we hold here." But Dockery stayed rooted. "I don't run," he said. Frank turned. "You will die." "I've been dead since 1913, Dockery whispered. Then he walked to the window, pulled the curtain wide and raised both hands. Gunfire, sharp, muffled. Evelyn screamed. Frank ducked, pulled her behind the wall. When the silence returned, Dockery was folded on the floor, blood like ink pooling under him. Evelyn clutched the folder. "We go." They moved fast, back door kicked open with one boot, into brambles and shadow, down the slope toward the reservoir. Rain returned, cold and sharp as blame. Frank held her elbow tight, steadying her steps. No pursuit yet, but soon. The reservoir tunnels began near Old Water Street, a rusted hatch behind an iron gate. Frank jimmied the lock with his penknife. It snapped easy. Too easy. "Someone's been here," he muttered. They slipped inside. The air was thick with mold and silence. Concrete walls, water seeping through hairline cracks. Their steps echoed like confessions. Evelyn held a small flashlight. The beam cut narrow paths through the dark. Along the wall, old markings, numbers, arrows, and once, the same symbol Vincent had drawn. "This is it," she said. 50 feet in, the tunnel sloped down. A steel grate barred the passage. Frank gripped the bars. "Cut or climb?" Evelyn reached into her bag, produces a crowbar. "Neither. Break." She wedged it into the bolts, leaned hard. Metal shrieked, but gave. The gate swung, and the air changed, colder, hollow, like breath from under the grave. They stepped into a chamber that didn't belong to any map. Stone walls, wet, blackened, and rings, rusted metal hoops bolted into the rock. Frank's voice cracked. He wasn't lying. In the far wall, a recess, small, human-sized. Inside it, a shape, bone, cloth, a skull tilted upward, jaw frozen in silent scream. Evelyn whispered, "This was the boy." Frank stepped closer. Something scraped under his boot. A locket. He bent, picked it up, opened it. Inside, a photo. Faded but clear. The boy and Alderman Vern, smiling. Frank backed away. Evelyn said, "He was family." Frank nodded. "And expendable." The chamber groaned. Sound of water, pipes, maybe something worse. They turned to go, but the grate was closed. And behind it, footsteps. The silhouette behind the grate was tall, wide at the shoulders, unmoving. A shadow in a city of shadows. Rain trickled through the cracks overhead, tapping iron like a clock counting down. Evelyn stepped forward. "Who is it?" The shadow didn't answer. Frank stepped in front of her. "City sends a killer, not a lawyer." Still silence. Then, a match struck. The flare lit a face both of them knew. Alderman Vern, older now, eyes sunken, skin like worn marble. But the mouth, still cold, still certain. "I wondered how long you'd last," he said. Frank's voice was sand. "You were there, in 1913, with the boy." Vern nodded slowly. "He saw things he shouldn't, screamed things he couldn't forget." "You chained him to a wall," Evelyn said. "We silenced panic," Vern replied. "The city was young. It couldn't survive fear." Frank took a step forward, fists curled. "He was your blood." Vern's lip twitched. "Exactly. That's why we made it quick." The words sank like stones. Evelyn trembled. "You killed your own nephew to hide a mistake." Vern's eyes flicked to her. "It wasn't a mistake. It was necessity. You of all people should understand that. How much would you kill to protect what you built?" Frank's voice was low. "Nothing's worth this." Vern raised the gun. "You shouldn't have come here." Frank reached for his own, but Vern was faster. The shot echoed like thunder trapped in stone. Evelyn screamed. Frank staggered back, hand pressed to his side. Blood soaked his shirt, warm against the cold. Evelyn dropped to her knees beside him. "Frank! Go!" he rasped. "You still can." Vern moved toward the gate. "No one leaves." Evelyn rose slowly. Her hand dipped into her coat. A second shot. Vern staggered, hit the grate with a groan. Frank blinked. Evelyn held the gun, arms shaking. Vern gasped once, then went still. The tunnel went quiet. No breath, no rain, no time. Evelyn dropped the weapon. Frank leaned against the wall, grimacing. "You always aim low." She half smiled, tears cutting lines through grime. "I was aiming for the heart." He nodded. "That's why you missed." They found another tunnel, narrower, older, smelled like iron and rot. Frank limped, hand pressed to the wound. Evelyn supported him, shoulders tense under his weight. "Just a little further," she whispered. The passage opened near the river. A metal grate, half rotted, let them out into the storm. The sky was just beginning to gray. City lights still clung to the fog. Somewhere, a horn blew. Somewhere, jazz played through a half-broken window. Frank sat on a bench near the water, breath ragged. Evelyn knelt beside him. "We need a doctor." "No," he said. "You need to run." "They'll come." "I know." "Then come with me." He looked at her, rain in her hair, eyes full of fire and ache. "I've already stayed too long." "Don't do this." Frank smiled. It cracked his lips. "You came back once." That was enough. She pressed her forehead to his. "I'm not leaving you." "Then stay, just until dawn." Later, when the pain numbed and time slowed, Frank reached into his coat, pulled the locket. Evelyn opened it, looked long. "This is the proof," she said. "We can go to the press. They'll bury it. Not if we put it in the right hands." Frank looked out at the river. "There are no right hands left, only ones that haven't been bought yet." She stared at him. "Then what do we do?" He was quiet a long time, then, "Let it bleed." The headlines came 3 days later. Corruption, scandal rocks City Hall. Allegations, tie former alderman to 1913 fire cover-up. The photo was grainy, a building sealed off, a face half obscured. The story was full of holes, but it burned hot. They never named Evelyn. They never mentioned Frank. But someone left a package on a journalist's doorstep. A locket, a photograph, a letter signed in red, "For the boy who never stopped screaming." Evelyn sat alone at the pier, coat pulled tight, cigarette nearly spent. Her eyes were dry. The rain had stopped, but the air still carried thunder. Footsteps behind her. She turned, half hoping. A man in a navy coat, stranger's face. He tipped his hat. "Miss Caldwell?" "Yes." He handed her an envelope. "From a friend." She opened it. Inside, one page. Frank's handwriting. "Evie, if this finds you, it means something made it through. Maybe not me. Maybe just the truth. They said I was just a drunk. But you knew better. Take care of that fire in you. Don't let the city put it out. I'll be where the river bends. F." She folded the letter slowly, stared out at the water. A gull cried somewhere far. The waves moved. The city didn't. Behind her, the jazz picked up again. Low, bruised, beautiful. The bench by the river stayed empty after dawn, just a dark stain on the wood where blood met rain. Frank Malloy was never found. No body, no coat, no whisper. But sometimes, late, when fog folds in close and the jazz spills low from crooked windows, bartenders swear they see a man in a torn hat, watching the streetlights. Not moving, just watching. In Evelyn's apartment, the locket hangs from a nail above the sink, open always, like an eye that never shuts. The letter stays folded in her coat. She still walks alone most nights, still smokes too much, still waits at piers longer than she should. She doesn't look back, but once, in the hush between footsteps, she heard it. A match strike, a low exhale, and the smell of rye and river salt. She didn't turn, just smiled once and whispered, "Took you long enough." The wind carried no answer, but the silence felt warm. For a moment, almost enough.